Have you ever heard of garfish? They have long, skinny noses and have been around since ancient times. They're commonly known as a freshwater trash fish, but if you ask aquatic ecologist Solomon David, who studies these scaly swimmers at the University of Minnesota, something tells me that he might argue that's a misnomer. We're here today for a conversation with the expert on all things GARs, and the very creator of Gar Week. 2025 marks the 5th year of Gar Week, which takes place from November 3rd to the 7th. Solomon's here to talk about why this species deserves its own week, along with why garfish have mostly stayed the same for more than 150 million years, and why that's so worth studying. Solomon, thank you for being here. It's great to have you on Great Lakes Now.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Happy to be here.
Okay, so first of all, people who don't know, what are garfish?
No, that's a great question. Great place to start. So, garfish, or gars for short, are a type of freshwater fish, primarily freshwater. Some of them can actually live in saltwater for extended periods of time. But if I were to describe one to you physically, if you imagine an alligator with fins instead of legs, maybe replacing that long tail with a paddle, you would have what a garfish would be. So crocodile or alligator with fins instead of legs. They got a long snout, which is kind of their main characteristic that people tend to notice. And that long snout is full of lots of sharp teeth.
Yeah, I think I saw you working in Texas or something. And honestly, it looked like the size of a dolphin or something. It was huge.
Yeah, we were doing field work in Mississippi recently, and so yeah, that was there were some very large alligator gars, which we don't have in the Great Lakes region. We do have some other gar species, but alligator gars can get pretty big, the size of a dolphin in some ways. Yeah.
And why gars? What drew you to them, aside from they obviously have very cute noses?
Right. Well, I appreciate saying that they've got cute noses because oftentimes people think they look scary or menacing or kind of fearsome. But really, if you look at them straight on, like face to face, they've got kind of the derpiest Muppet-looking face that you can imagine. So I appreciate that take on gars. I've always been interested in sort of the underappreciated animals, the creatures like the snakes and other reptiles, amphibians, insects, and also dinosaurs. And so those things captured my interest as a kid. And when I was about 11 years old, I was flipping through a Ranger Rick magazine, which is put out by the National Wildlife Federation. And I flipped the pages open to a section that had this giant fish that looked like an alligator with fins instead of legs. It had this giant head with lots of teeth that remind me kind of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is my favorite dinosaur. And I thought, this is really cool. It's this prehistoric looking fish that was still alive today. And with that, I kind of learned about their various adaptations. They've got these armored scales, they can breathe air, they've been around for over 150 million years, and they've remained relatively unchanged too. So a lot of cool adaptations, but they've got that prehistoric look to them. So that really drew me in as a kid, and that's what I would say first got me into gars.
And why Gar Week? What's the significance behind Gar Week?
Right. And so I do want to make sure that I credit Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation because we kind of started that together several years ago. And that was to raise awareness of these underappreciated fish. They kind of work as sort of a gateway to broader biodiversity and conservation, this sort of underappreciated group. Oftentimes, they're unfortunately considered to be trash fish or rough fish. People don't see the value in those fish the way they might see in, let's say, bass or trout or salmon. And we wanted to show that these fish are important components of native biodiversity and they're important components of freshwater ecosystems. So GARS and GAR Week kind of work together as sort of a 1 or 2 or 3 off from like Shark Week and those other weeks that are dedicated to different animals. And that worked to kind of, again, raise awareness of the value of these fish, but also broadly freshwater biodiversity.
That's great. Okay, so for somebody who doesn't know anything about GARs, what are maybe 3 of your favorite facts to share?
Yeah, 3 favorite facts. It's so hard to narrow that down. I would say one of the coolest things about them is they're considered to be the sort of idea of a living fossil, something that appears to not have changed much over evolutionary time. So if you were to go back 150 million years to the Jurassic period, and saw a gar there, and you look at a modern gar, they look basically the same. So they've got that elongate body, those armored scales, that same sort of body plan has served them well for millions and millions of years. And so they've kind of stuck with that plan, and it's really worked for them. So I'd say that's one of the coolest things, is that they've stayed the same for so long. Another cool thing about gars is that they've got this ability to breathe air. There are other fish that can breathe air, but that's one of the cool things about gars too, is that they can go up to the surface and they can gulp air when the water doesn't have that much oxygen in it. So they've got this vascularized organ called a gas bladder that works kind of like a lung or a scuba tank. And so that allows them to survive in all kinds of different environments. So again, that adaptation that's allowed them to survive for so long. And they've also got these armored scales. Their scales are basically made out of something very similar to tooth enamel. So it's much tougher and much more armored than maybe what you might think of when you think of a fish like a bluegill or a walleye or a salmon that have very flexible and thin scales. Gars have these very armored scales, which I think, again, are just a cool adaptation that have allowed them to survive for this long.
Very, very cool. Very cool. I've noticed on your Blue Sky that you have a lot of fun puns when talking about gars. I've seen regardless. I've seen the millennial favorite Ermagard.
Right.
What's your favorite gar related pun?
Oh gosh, having to pick a favorite is so tough. I think, what I like about it is that people oftentimes share with me new gar puns, and so I like that it's now become sort of a crowdsourced thing. I would say a classic that I always go back to is gargantuan. It's got gar right in it. So if you're describing like those big alligator gars that we were working with down in Mississippi, gargantuan seems to be a natural one that comes to mind there. And I think we were filming something for Gar Week with the Bell Museum of Natural History right here on campus today, and we were opening up a museum tank there, and the sounds were recording. And so one of my former students, Faith Kelly, said ASM Gar instead of ASMR for the sounds. So I like that, like, we can have other people involved with coming up with the puns.
Those are great. I love that. Okay, so within the freshwater ecosystem of the Great Lakes Basin, what role do gars play?
Right. So they are found throughout the Great Lakes region. It's different types of different species. So we've got the long-nosed gar and the spotted gar right there in Michigan. The long-nosed gar is more common, especially in sort of the Great Lakes area. The spotted gar tends to stay more in inland lakes, but they are found along Lake Michigan and some of those sort of border areas there. But they are predators. So they're oftentimes the top predator in their given environment. They are highly piscivorous or fish eating. So they primarily are eating fish, but they might eat, large insects or other small vertebrates like reptiles, amphibians. But they are basically at the top of the fishy food chain. When they're smaller, water birds might eat them, small mammals. But once you get to, let's say, a 3-foot long long-nosed gar, nothing is really going to be messing with you, not in the Great Lakes region. So as predators, they can help maintain balance in those ecosystems. So they're oftentimes eating different types of forage fish like minnows or shad, and then also maintaining balance even in some game fish populations like sunfish, where they can tend to get overpopulated and stunted. So just like wolves in Yellowstone, you kind of need those predator-prey balances to maintain ecosystem health.
Okay, great. If I'm curious, like, it makes me think about like how muskie are like giant and they have the scary teeth. Like if a muskie and a gar were together, like who would win?
Right. Classic who would win. I feel like my kids, I've got a first grader in kindergarten. They love those who would win books. A muskie can get pretty big, but they don't have the armored scales that a gar would have. So it'd be tough for the muskie to really damage the gar that much. But a gar is pretty skinny too. So I would say you might end up with a bit of a draw unless the muskie was big enough to swallow the gar. But if you had both fish the same size, I think you're looking at a Great Lakes tie there.
I love that. Okay, so how is a Great Lakes gar different from, say, like a Texas gar?
Right. Yeah, so we do have different species in the United States. So we've got the long-nosed gar and the spotted gar up in the Great Lakes region. We also have the short-nosed gar in some of the Great Lakes towards the Wisconsin side. But we do have spotted long-nosed and short-nosed gars down in Texas and other parts of the southern United States. One of the things we looked at in my research when I was at University of Michigan studying Great Lakes spotted gars is their differences in growth rates. So in the Great Lakes region, they have a difference in length of growing season. The amount of time that they have to grow in a given year is much shorter up north than it is down south because of winter. So once winter is coming, they kind of have to shift where they're putting energy to, whether it's reproductive growth or whether it's sort of a somatic cell or body growth. And so you've got a lot of that contrast up north that you don't have down south. And so we notice there's actually differences in growth rate between those northern populations and the southern populations. And what's also interesting is that it's kind of counterintuitive. They actually tend to grow a bit faster in the north than they do in the south because they've had to evolve this faster growth rate to deal with that shorter growing season. So while we have a shorter growing season, they're growing as much as they can in that brief period of time compared to down south where we've got a longer period of time to grow. So they tend to live longer and grow faster in the north. They tend to actually live a little bit shorter period of time and grow a little bit slower down in the south.
That's really, really interesting. So, what do we know about the ancient lives of these fish? I know you said earlier they're kind of known as living fossils, but why have they evolved as much as some other fish species?
Yeah, so I like to think that they've kind of found this body plan and they've stuck with it because it's worked. It's been very adaptive to different types of habitats. So if you look at the long-nosed gar, which is found right near you all in Detroit, the long-nosed gar can live in freshwater. They can live for extended periods of time in salt water. They breathe air, so that helps them adapt to conditions that might have low oxygen water or maybe even, fast flowing water. So there's populations of long-nosed gars that will swim upstream, kind of like salmon do, to spawn, and they'll move back into lakes. They can survive off the coast of Florida and Texas in, full salt water for extended periods of time. So they're highly adaptable in that way. And so I think that's contributed to their ability to kind of persist through evolutionary time relatively unchanged compared to a lot of different species. They also have poisonous eggs. So those eggs are toxic to birds, mammals, and a lot of invertebrates. So if your eggs are poisonous, that's going to come in handy too to keep predators away as well.
Wow, that's so fascinating. They are such survivors.
They are.
Okay, so what else is sort of special about the fact that they haven't changed over time? I'm thinking about a National Geographic article I read from 2024 where you're quoted as saying that they could be studied to help with human disease. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and so over the years, a lot of folks have worked on looking at GARs more closely from a genetic or genomics perspective. Dr. Ingo Brasch, who's based out of Michigan State, was part of the team that sequenced the spotted GAR genome. And what they found is that because GARs are so, ancient on the evolutionary tree, their genetic makeup is actually organized closer to humans and other tetrapods like, other birds, reptiles, amphibians, than it is to a lot of the modern fishes or the teleost fishes like bluegill or salmon, zebrafish, which is oftentimes used in biomedical research. And so GARs can kind of go between zebrafish research and sort of human research and let's say other mammal research as sort of a go-between to help make that research more meaningful. What we know about zebrafish, we can compare it to GAR and compare GAR to humans, and that kind of expands our understanding of sort of genomic organization and evolutionary biology, and that might have applications to understanding human disease evolution as well. So that's part of it where we've learned that their genome is organized very similar to, humans and other tetrapods because they aren't as closely related to these modern fishes. So we're diving deeper into their genomics right now. What we've also found is that their genetic makeup has changed very slowly compared to a lot of other so-called living fossil organisms like crocodilians, sharks, sea turtles, tuataras. And so there was a study led by authors at Yale University, and I was a co-author on that study, and they found that their molecular rate of evolution, so their rate of evolution or mutations in their genetic code is slower than all these other organisms. It's the slowest among any other vertebrate that has a jaw. So you're going to remove your lampreys, some of which you have in the Great Lakes region, and the hagfish. If you're looking at vertebrates with a jaw, GARs are evolving slower than any of those other organisms. So that slow rate of change is probably contributing to their body plan looking very similar to those the fossil record GARs. And as we sort of make that potential application to human health, what we hypothesize is that there might be a DNA repair mechanism that's correcting mutations in the GAR genome. So when you think about evolution or molecular evolution, it's usually due to mutations. It's possible that there's something that's correcting mutations as GAR DNA is replicating and changing and just sort of resetting it back to the original or, the correct version. So if we can identify potentially what that DNA repair mechanism is, there might be potential applications to things like human health farther down the line. But it's a start and it's something interesting to think about, especially when you consider that we've oftentimes as humans considered GARs to be trash fish or rough fish. It could be that they've got other benefits both to humans and alongside those freshwater ecosystems.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so what do you wish more people knew about these fish? Anything that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to look at them, I think, as a gateway fish in a way, sort of this sort of odd looking fish. Like you said, when you look at a gar, so this is actually a spotted gar from my research at University of Michigan. So this is a Great Lakes spotted gar. You look at their, shape and the way they look, it's very different than a typical fish that you might expect. So I think that sort of odd morphology to them, that odd look kind of brings people in, that weirdness. And so I think with that, they might think, okay, well, that animal is kind of interesting. And I do think it's important we recognize fish as a type of animal. We oftentimes separate wildlife and fish, right? And so recognizing that it's an animal, it's unique, it's interesting. Within its native range, they are important to native freshwater biodiversity. So I think I wish that people would understand more that they have a role to play in their native ecosystems, balancing ecosystems, being indicators of good environmental health. And they might also, through what we can learn about them through their evolutionary biology, inform what we know about ourselves too.
Any last words on the importance of Gar Week?
Yeah, I think, we want Gar Week to be accessible. I think if you check out Gar Week, if you just check out the hashtag Gar Week across, all the major social media platforms, you'll see posts about GARs, GAR puns, GAR facts, coming from a lot of different organizations and agencies, whether it's Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, who are teamed up to put on Gar Week, also different museums, aquariums, zoos. So I would say if you're interested in participating, you've got a cool GAR story or GAR picture, feel free to post that and tag GAR Week. We'd love to reshare that and check that out. If you've got any questions about GARs, please feel free to send those in the comments to any of the posts there. That way we can kind of, help spread the word of GAR over the course of GAR Week.
Amazing. Well, thanks for joining us, Solomon. It's been great talking to you today.
Thanks so much for having me, Lisa.
For more information about garfish and Gar Week, check the links in our description on YouTube, and be sure to follow Solomon David for more details about these funky fish on Blue Sky, Instagram, or TikTok, either at Solomon R. David or at Gar Lab. And to get more stories about the lakes you love, subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the Great Lakes Now newsletter. You can find it at greatlakesnow.org.